Today, we're diving into one of the most mind-bending alternative history scenarios ever conceived. What if women had always been the dominant gender throughout human civilization? I'm not talking about some modern feminist fantasy or wishful thinking bullshit. I'm talking about reimagining the entire arc of human development from the ground up, exploring how fundamentally different our world would be if the power dynamics we take for granted had been flipped from day one. Picture this. Instead of patriarchal societies emerging from hunter-gatherer communities, imagine if the early agricultural revolution had been led by women. If the first cities were founded by female chiefs, the great empires of antiquity were ruled by queens and empresses, who saw male rulers as historical anomalies. This isn't just about swapping out kings for queens. This is about reimagining the entire framework of human civilization. Now, you might be wondering how this could have happened in the first place. The answer lies in understanding that patriarchal dominance isn't some natural law of human development. It's a historical accident that could have gone very differently. In our timeline, physical strength and warfare became the primary drivers of political power. But what if intelligence, social organization, and long-term planning had been valued more highly from the beginning? Let me tell you something that's going to blow your mind about alternative gender dynamics. The qualities that make someone an effective leader in complex societies are actually more traditionally associated with feminine traits than masculine ones. We're talking about emotional intelligence, collaborative decision-making, risk assessment, and the ability to build and maintain social networks. In a world where these skills were prioritized over brute force, female leadership would have been the obvious choice. The biological advantages that women actually have over men are rarely discussed in our male-dominated historical narrative. Women live longer, have better immune systems, are more resistant to disease, and have superior fine motor skills. In a world where survival and technological advancement were the primary concerns, these advantages could have translated into social and political dominance. But here's what makes this alternative history so fascinating. It's not just about imagining women in positions of power that men historically held. It's about reimagining what power itself would look like in a female-dominated world. The entire concept of leadership, governance, and social organization would have evolved along completely different lines. The methods of conflict resolution in a female-dominated world would have been fundamentally different from what we know. Instead of the winner-take-all warfare that characterized most of human history, we might have seen more sophisticated systems of negotiation, alliance building, and diplomatic solutions. The idea that might makes right might never have taken hold in the same way. Let me paint you a picture of what early human civilization might have looked like under female leadership, instead of the constant tribal warfare that marked much of prehistory. We might have seen more cooperative models of expansion and settlement. Female leaders, with their tendency toward collaboration and consensus building, might have created more stable and sustainable early societies. The technological development path would have been completely different. Instead of prioritizing weapons and military technology, a female-dominated civilization might have focused on medicine, agriculture, and domestic innovations much earlier. We might have seen advanced healthcare systems, better nutrition, and more sophisticated social services thousands of years before they actually developed. But here's where it gets really interesting: the religious and philosophical systems that emerged from female-dominated societies would have been radically different. Instead of the sky god, warrior deity religions that dominated much of human history, we might have seen earth goddess, life-giving spiritual systems that emphasized harmony, cyclical thinking, and the interconnectedness of all life. The social implications of female-dominated civilization would have been massive. The concept of honor through violence might never have developed. Instead, honor might have been associated with wisdom, healing, creativity, or the ability to maintain social harmony. The entire value system of human civilization would have been oriented around different priorities. One of the most fascinating aspects of this alternative history is how it would have affected the treatment of children and the concept of family. In societies where women held the power, child-rearing and education would likely have been given much higher priority. We might have seen more sophisticated educational systems, better understanding of child psychology, and more nurturing approaches to human development. The economic systems that would have emerged from female-dominated societies would have been fundamentally different from what we know. Instead of the competitive, resource extraction models that characterize much of human economic development, we might have seen more sustainable, cooperative economic systems that prioritize long-term stability over short-term gain. Here's something that shows you how different this world would have been: the concept of environmental stewardship might have been built into human civilization from the beginning. Female leaders, with their tendency toward long-term thinking and concern for future generations, might have developed sustainable practices that prevented the kind of environmental destruction that has characterized much of human history. The artistic and cultural achievements of female-dominated civilizations would have been remarkable. Instead of the monument-building, conquest celebrating art that dominated much of human history, we might have seen more sophisticated forms of expression focused on beauty, harmony, and the celebration of life rather than death and destruction. The scientific advancement in such a world would have taken completely different paths. Instead of the emphasis on physics and engineering that characterized much of scientific development, we might have seen earlier breakthroughs in biology, medicine, psychology, and the social sciences. The scientific method itself might have developed along more collaborative and holistic lines. But here's what's really twisted about imagining this alternative. History, it forces us to confront how arbitrary and contingent our current gender dynamics really are. The idea that men are naturally suited for leadership and women for supporting roles isn't based on any fundamental truth about human nature. It's based on historical circumstances that could have gone very differently. The communication patterns in female-dominated societies would have been radically different. Instead of the hierarchical, command and control communication styles that characterized much of human organization, we might have seen more networked, collaborative communication systems that emphasized listening, empathy, and consensus building. The legal systems that would have emerged from female-dominated societies would have been fascinating. Instead of the punishment-based retributive justice systems that dominated much of human history, we might have seen more restorative, healing-oriented approaches to dealing with social problems. The entire concept of justice might have been oriented around rehabilitation and social harmony rather than punishment and deterrence. The technology of governance in such a world would have been incredibly sophisticated. Female leaders, with their tendency toward collaborative decision-making and concern for social welfare, might have developed more democratic and participatory forms of government thousands of years before they actually emerged in human history. But here's what makes this alternative history so compelling. It's not just about imagining a better world. It's about understanding how contingent and arbitrary our current gender dynamics really are. The qualities we associate with masculinity and femininity, the roles we think are natural for men and women, the power structures we take for granted. All of these things are historical constructs that could have developed very differently. The documentation of this alternative history would have been fascinating. Instead of the male-centered historical records that dominate our understanding of the past, we might have seen more holistic, inclusive approaches to recording human experience. The voices and perspectives that have been marginalized throughout history might have been central to how civilizations understood themselves. The psychology of power in female-dominated societies would have been completely different. Instead of the dominant-submission dynamics that characterized much of human social organization, we might have seen more egalitarian, collaborative approaches to leadership and social hierarchy. The entire concept of authority might have been based on wisdom and service rather than force and intimidation.